Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa. And by a special request, I am doing this outside. And we'll see how it goes because it's flat as a pancake here where I'm living. And so it's usually windy as the F word. And today is relatively non-windy, so maybe the microphone won't be picking up wind interference the whole time. So yeah, you're spared of the crummy interior of my meditation trailer, which is sort of the modern Western equivalent of a hut. And so we're out in the pavilion, out in back of the monastery, and that is the big Buddhist statue behind me. And we have a question about statues coming up, so I might as well get to it. First question is from Bodhisattva 969. And he asks, how do you start to meditate alone? What is the best way to begin? So that's a good basic question. Good question to start with. So really, if you really want to start meditating, probably the best thing for you to do would be to go to like an introductory retreat or go to like a meditation center and get some basic instructions. But just right here, as sort of some initial pointers, you should have like a clean, quiet place where you can sit cross-legged on the floor if you're able to do that. Maybe have a rolled up towel or a pillow under your behind so that it's easier for you to keep your knees down. You don't want to be sitting with your knees like up like this when you're sitting. Good to have them down so that you're forming like a solid tripod. And keep your back straight. And doesn't really matter where you keep your hands so long as you have them at rest. And usually the best introductory meditation is meditation on your breath, in which case you would have your concentration or your attention focused right around your nostrils, and you would be just paying attention to the sensation of the wind moving in and out of your nose. And for a beginner, you may have to start with just counting your breaths, which would be like counting, one in-breath, out-breath is 1, and in-breath, out-breath 2, and get up to 5. And then you'd start at 1 again and go up to 6, and then you'd start at 1 again and go up to 7, and you just keep starting back at 1 until you get up to 10, and then you start 1 through 5, 1 through 6, 1 through 7. And just that kind of having to keep track helps to keep your mind focused on the breathing. Although it's kind of like a chore, it's sort of like doing push-ups or something. It's not really particularly enjoyable. But if you're able to do it, then you would just start like labeling just breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. And your mind is just going to wander to other things. You'll just start wondering, what was that noise, or, my knee itches or whatever. And as soon as you catch that your mind has wandered away, you just note that, and then you come back to breathing in, breathing out. There are other ways to do it. I don't want to get it too complicated, but you could also just meditate on like the syllable Om, or if you're really just starting off as a beginner, just trying to see how it feels to just kind of relax into not just having the monkey mind jumping all over the place, but having your mind just focused on something very simple, to keep your mind from just proliferating all kinds of weird ideas. You could also just meditate gazing at a candle flame, which is a common yoga sort of meditation. Or you could light an incense stick and just keep your concentration focused on the seeing of the smoke as it rises. And that's kind of a good one too, because then you'll know when to stop meditating is when the incense stick is burned all the way down, which is, 20, 25 minutes for the average incense stick, I think. Or you could even just sit in front of like a goldfish bowl or an aquarium and just quietly watch the fish just silently gliding through the water, which is a very effective relaxation technique for people who are stressed out. You know, you come home from work, you just sit down in front of the fish tank and watch the fish for 15 minutes or something. But it is good if you can sit cross-legged with both knees more or less down and keep your back straight, because it helps you to stay alert and keep your mind as simple as possible and stay awake and alert in the present moment, because that's really the point of meditation. But as I say, if you have access to it, then you do well to go to like a meditation retreat or a meditation center, or at least read a book on elementary meditation, because I can't really get very far with explaining the basics in just answering one of many questions. So I hope that's enough. I mean, it's well worth it. You know, I definitely encourage people to practice meditation because it has many benefits, and it gets you closer to reality, helps you to escape from Plato's cave and all that, which is good. So next question, also from Bodhisattva 969. How can we introduce an enlightened Western Buddhism without becoming effeminate at the same time? Well, original Buddhism certainly was not effeminate. In fact, as I've said before, the original early Buddhism was about as masculine of a spiritual system as has existed in this world. First of all, it was based on just asceticism. And monks, of course, avoided women like the plague, except for when they were silently putting food into the monk's bowl in the morning when he'd go for alms. So I think in order to have a relatively masculine form of Buddhism, you'd have to have austerity, you know, just enduring discomfort with equanimity. That would be a big one. And fearlessness, which you can cultivate that if you're meditating in a forest, I suppose. I like the idea of meditation retreats being conducted in forests anyway. So just, you know, if you have the leisure time and the weather permitting, you could just hike out into the woods and meditate under a tree or something. And also just taking responsibility for yourself. Buddhism is, in the West especially, is just ignoring the whole concept of karma, where everything that happens to us is the fruition of our own karma, which is literally our own doing. And so if anything bad happens to you, you don't whine and complain and call yourself a victim, which is largely the direction that just about everybody's going in the West, including so-called Buddhists. And you just accept it because, you know, it's the fruition of your own karma, and you just man up and accept the consequences of your own actions. But yeah, I mean, with regard to early Buddhism, they were in order to be a monk in ancient India, ancient northern Ganges Valley, you had to be really tough. So yeah, Buddhism was not intended to be a feminized system, which is certainly what it is becoming in the West with you know, lesbian gurus and that sort of thing. So next question from Reconciliation. Do you know about the Catholic monk Thomas Merton being assassinated for being about creating anti-war opposition movement that could not be stopped by the Vietnam War hawks? I know about Thomas Merton. I've read like the edited version of his diaries, and this was really the first I'd heard of any conspiracy theory about him being killed by the government, the U.S. government. My understanding is that he was killed by a freak accident when an electric fan fell on his head in Bangkok, Thailand. And I mean, obviously, to me anyway, at least in the edited version of his diaries, he mentioned nothing about being followed by agents or anything like that. I mean, it took him completely by surprise as far as I could tell. And I did read an article or two on the supposed assassination of Father Merton, and it seemed to me that like the evidence was pretty sketchy and hearsay, and so maybe it happened, but I don't know that much about it, and I'm inclined to just assume that he did die from a freak accident from having an electric fan fall on his head and instantaneously electrocute him, or whatever the cause of death supposedly was. Next question from Nardi. I came across a book about Buddhist cosmology, and I would like to know your opinion on the subject. Is this an issue in the Theravada school, or is it more of a Mahayana thing? Well, certainly there's a lot of cosmology in ancient Indian Buddhism, including Theravada. And I think pretty much all religions have cosmology, because one of the main reasons of a religious system, especially for the masses, not the advanced practitioner so much, but for the average person, like the average villager, is it explains the universe. You know, they want to have like everything explained. They want to know what the stars are in the sky at night. You know, they want to know what causes rain and everything. So there's going to be some cosmology in just about any kind of religious system, because that's one of the main purposes of religion. So yeah, the Theravada Buddhists pretty much inherited most of their cosmology from just ancient Indian culture. So you had the flat earth floating on water with the 10 million mile high mountain in the center called Meru, and the 4 great continents, and the stars and the sun and other heavenly bodies are inhabited by deities and this kind of thing. So yeah, it goes all the way back to the beginning, and most of it, I assume, is pre-Buddhist, although any religion is going to modify the cosmology to fit it into their religion, and also so that they can say, you know, we've got the improved, correct version. You know, they're not just going to completely borrow their entire cosmology from some previous religious system, because that would indicate that the previous religious system was right also. So yeah, there is like an ancient Indian cosmology that the Buddhists pretty much just adopted from the culture. And it's really irrelevant to practicing Dhamma. And from the Western, like the modern Western point of view, it's pretty much outmoded. You know, like the flat earth floating on water just is not very convincing to most people, although of course there are a few flat earthers out there. So next question from Kuru Minha. Why do you think Theravada Buddhism is necessarily opposed to scientific realism? Greetings from Brazil. Necessarily opposed to scientific realism. At present, I suppose you could say it's necessarily opposed. Maybe in future scientific realism, as you know, science progresses, then it will come closer and closer. In fact, scientific realism has been coming closer and closer to a lot of Eastern philosophies. For example, with regard to the observer effect and the influence of consciousness on like conditioning what we perceive and that sort of thing. You know, that's getting much closer to Buddhism. But with regard to like the main opposition, I suppose, between Theravada Buddhism and scientific realism, I think it would probably be something along the lines of the effects of karma. You know, karma is just not a scientific term. So yeah, like the whole idea of karma conditioning our experience, everything that we experience in like the sensual realm is supposedly the fruition of our own karma. And then of course you've got the whole issue of rebirth and that sort of thing. So yeah, I would assume that the whole idea of karma and just the radically fundamental influence of consciousness on everything around us, like later schools in Theravada just dispensed with the whole notion of physical matter and just started becoming idealist. And even Theravada that accepts the reality of physical matter is almost idealist, really, because as I say, everything that we experience sensually, including our own thoughts, is the fruition of past karma. So I would assume that would be the main difference. And as scientific realism becomes more and more aware of the influence of consciousness on what we perceive, then I assume they're going to get closer and closer. Although, of course, Orthodox Theravada Buddhism isn't going to change, but scientific realism is changing, and it is apparently getting closer and closer, not only to Theravada Buddhism, but to Eastern spiritual systems in general. So next question from follower number A12C67E7. I have two questions. Do you personally think there's any significance to dreams beyond manifestations of the subconscious mind? And I might as well just conflate that with the next question, which is, does Buddhism have anything to say about dreams? So, my understanding from a biological point of view is the main purpose of dreams is it helps to organize information in our brain. It makes our brain more efficient. Like, they've found that animals that don't dream have to have a larger brain than animals that do dream, just to compensate for the loss of efficiency that happens through dreaming. So I remember when I was in college, I wrote a research paper on intelligence in dolphins. And at the time, I couldn't come up with a good reason why a bottlenose dolphin would have such a large, complicated brain, larger and more complicated than ours, even though it doesn't have like hands and fingers and things that need extra brain tissue to control them. And even though it's somewhat larger than us, I mean, a lot of the extra weight is just blubber that doesn't require any nervous tissue. So, but then years later, I found out that dolphins don't dream because they can only sleep for 6 minutes at a stretch because they have to hold their breath while they're sleeping. So they have to hold their breath and catch a quick nap, and then they have to wake up in order to start breathing again. So just from a biological point of view, it increases efficiency. And so it's, things that happen in your day or things that have happened recently will just come up and sort of reinforce the neural pathways, help to get everything organized and integrated and that sort of thing. Although you can have dreams that are like subconscious messages to your conscious mind. So you can have dreams that have some kind of spiritual importance or value. So there is that. And one of my favorite examples is, I've talked about this before, how I used to have an Australian monk friend who was thinking about dropping out of the monkhood. And he had this dream that he didn't understand at all, but as soon as he told it to me, it just clicked. I mean, I just understood the meaning of it, which, excuse me, I just had lunch. It indicates that, I mean, your subconscious mind can be like leaving messages that your conscious mind won't even necessarily know about. It won't be aware of it, which is interesting. And anyway, his dream was that he was in a canoe in a little lake, paddling around and around, and at the other end of the canoe were 3 or 4 gorillas. And the gorillas were very quiet, very well behaved, but he knew that if he paddled back to shore, they'd jump out and run amok. And so he was stuck out in this lake, paddling around and around with these gorillas, afraid to go back to shore because he knew the gorillas would just jump out and start causing trouble. And for me, it was just plainly obvious that, like Freud says, dreaming about water is symbolic of religion or spirit. And so him being stuck out in this lake was him pretty much being stuck as a monk in his own mind, because he was afraid that the gorillas, which were his defilements, like his baser instincts, were under control while he was a monk. But if he went back into lay life, he'd just go back to his old rascally ways, which to some degree did happen because he did drop out. And I do hope that he is happy. I haven't heard from him in many years. So with regard to Buddhism having anything to say about dreams, well, I mean, obviously there's the more or less mythological story of the Buddha's mother getting pregnant from a dream. Like technically she wasn't a virgin, like Jesus's mother supposedly was, but yeah, she got pregnant after dreaming of a white elephant. entering her. The elephants are sometimes called Naga, which also can just mean a great one. Like the Buddha himself is called Naga sometimes. So, I mean, that's a pretty basic, significant dream in Orthodox Buddhism right there. On the other hand, I mean, you can get messages from dreams sometimes. I mean, if it's clearly some kind of message coming up, then you should not just completely dismiss it. But Buddhism, as a general rule, does discourage monks from getting into the business of interpreting dreams. Becoming like a fortune teller, telling people the meanings of their dreams and that sort of thing. So, for the most part, dreams are just kind of a like spam. Most dreams are probably spam dreams, but every once in a while, I mean, if there's some obvious benefit or meaning to one that really stands out, then yeah, you shouldn't just totally disregard it, because Buddhism says monks shouldn't pay much attention to that stuff. So let's see, there's another question about a dream towards the end, so I'll move on to the next one from Sakyaputta. Sakyaputta asked a question in a YouTube comment, but it somehow disappeared, and it was visible only in the notifications but not below the video, which is pretty common now. I don't know why that is. He says, "Greetings, Venerable, curious about your thoughts on these statements," and then it was followed by links to no fewer than 11 other YouTube videos by a person called Theoria Apophasis. And yeah, I don't want to give comments on all 11 videos. In fact, I didn't want to watch all 11 videos, but I will give my response to the first one, which is Mr. Theoria Apophasis was talking about the meaning of the word Tathagata, which is a synonym for the Buddha. The Buddha is called the Tathagata a lot. In fact, he refers to himself as the Tathagata a lot of the time. And yeah, Theoria Apophasis was pretty obviously incorrect in his interpretation, at least with regard to Pali, because he says that the Tathagata is the combination of two words, which is tat and agata. And tat is Sanskrit, which means like that. Maybe it has the same etymology as the English word that, like tat tuam asi in the Upanishads, that thou art. And agata means, I think he agrees that it means like came. Like gachati is to go, agachati is to come, and agata is the past participle of to come, which means, come or become, something like that. So the issue I had with his interpretation is that the Tathagata is the combination of two words, but it's not dat plus agata, it's the ta plus agata. And the ta means like this, or such, essentially. And agata means, having come or having become. So the Tathagata, my best guess, and it seems fairly solid, fairly steady, is that the Tathagata means he who has become thus, he who has become like this. And this data, or like this, or such, is pretty common in Buddhist philosophy, because it's trying to put into words something that can't be put into words. Like Bertrand Russell said that the entire English language, every word in the English language, except that and this, are generalizations. That and this are specifics, but everything else is a generalization. Even if I say me, that's a generalization of different versions of me over the past 57 years. So it means, one who has become such. And there are other similar versions, like in the Atthakavagga, it refers to enlightened beings as tadi, which means something like, one who is thus, one who is like this. So you can't really put nirvana or enlightenment into words, because that just causes it to become something other than nirvana or enlightenment, because enlightenment is non-symbolic, it's non-perceptual. So once you put a label on it, then you've changed it into something else. And so they kind of try to dance around that by saying, you attain just thusness or suchness. You just become like this, and leave it at that. So, Theoria Apophasis, judging from his name and also from the one video that I watched part of another one, but it seems like he definitely has kind of axe to grind where he's trying to interpret any kind of enlightened system, excuse me again, in accordance with like Vedanta, which is really reifying ultimate reality, reifying enlightenment. And Buddhism generally tended to avoid that as much as possible. So you can interpret Buddhism in terms of like Vedanta, and there's a big train going behind me now. In a way, you're like drifting away from Buddhism by doing so. So if he wants to interpret Buddhism in accordance with like traditionalism or like the perennial philosophy and reify ultimate reality and enlightenment and that sort of thing, I mean, it's his choice, and it may be useful for some people, but eventually you have to let even that go. Okay, next question from Brian. Here is a question I just thought of that I have thought of before. In your videos, you seem to be trying to get back to a more genuine Buddhism. What do you think of Buddha statues? I've got nothing against Buddha statues. It is true that in early Buddhism, there were no Buddha images. In fact, there are some people who theorize that the first Buddha statues were made by Greeks who had conquered northwestern India, and some of them had converted to Buddhism. And of course, the Greeks liked their statues of Aphrodite and Apollo and that sort of thing. And so they modeled the Buddha on Apollo. And at that time, like around the beginning of the Christian era, the Greeks modeled Apollo with a kind of aristocratic top knot of hair. And that's the theory of why the Buddha usually has like a knob on top of his head now. It just got, people lost or forgot the original meaning of it, or they just never knew that originally it was like an aristocratic Greek top knot of hair. I mean, going with the theory. And so it got turned into like an eternal flame, or just a weird, mysterious bump on his head. And people interpret that as one of the marks of the 32 marks of the great man, is he's got a head shaped like a turban. But I assume that just means that he has sort of like a kind of a round skull or something. But it is true that in early Buddhism there were no statues. In fact, they wanted to emphasize the fact that the Buddha just wasn't in the world anymore. He wasn't in any of the 31 planes of existence. And so in the earliest Buddhist images, they would just have like an empty seat or a footprint or just a Bodhi leaf or something like that, just to indicate that Gautama Buddha is just not in the picture anymore. He is totally beyond. He is not in any of the 31 planes of existence. But for some people, it can be helpful. It gives you something to kind of focus your attention on. And there have been times when I've bowed down to statues. Usually, like when I'm going to some pagoda or shrine or something with other monks, they're all bowing to the image, and I just stand there. In fact, sometimes I get sideways looks because I'm the only person not bowing to the statue. Or just going to the shrine room to do the Uposatha ceremony when all the monks are bowing to the big statue, and I'm just kind of sitting there. I'm not an idolater. So, but there have been times, I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this, but one of the few times I ever took LSD as a monk was in Burma, and I was staying at this little monastery, and I just stayed up all night. And I was just sitting right in front of the main shrine at the monastery, because my room was just on this little side room off the side of the main congregation hall. And yeah, I was just overflowing with gratitude and veneration and bowing over and over and over again. But as a general rule, it's just sort of it's not fundamentally Buddhist. It's not really an aspect of the teachings like the scriptures of Theravada Buddhism. So if it helps somebody to focus their attention, or inspires in them like veneration and gratitude, that kind of thing, then yeah, more power to you. But I do have a little Buddha statue, so so I'm not really opposed to statues, but it's just like a later development in Theravada Buddhism and Buddhism in general. Let's see, where am I? Next question from Jacob. How does a Westerner go about becoming a monk in Asia? That's a good question. And probably the easiest way would be to find one of the main meditation centers in Burma, or wherever you're going in Thailand or Sri Lanka. There are big like international meditation centers where you can kind of get your foot in the door. You can apply to go there, and then they have like a well-developed I don't know what you call it, administrative system or something, where they just have like somebody who's in charge of working out the visa issues for foreigners who come there to stay, and that sort of thing. The way I did it was I was ordained at a Burmese place in California, and then from California, the supporters, like the Burmese supporters of the place who still lived in Burma, they were able to pull strings, and the whole tradition. If you want to ordain in like a major tradition, then you can hook up with like maybe a branch of that tradition outside of Asia and sort of get your foot in the door that way. Otherwise, it's relatively difficult. Maybe in a place like Thailand, but in Burma, it's always been a little bit difficult to get set up there. But once you're set up there, it's easy. They have like meditation visas in Burma. So just once a year, I mean, you just get renewals, and I'd have somebody taking care of that for me in Rangoon. So yeah, so let's see. How does a Westerner go about becoming a monk in Asia? You could become a monk outside of Asia in an Asian tradition, which would then ease your way to Asia, which is good, because if you're going to be a monk especially, you're better off being a monk in Asia, at least at first. Now, I strongly recommend any Buddhist monk, any Theravada Buddhist monk, to spend at least a few years in Asia, just so you feel what it's like to live a lifestyle similar to the way the Buddha was living it. Like in Burma, I mean, you can live very close to the way monks were living 2,500 years ago. You can just wander around and sleep under trees or in caves or whatever. And although the government discourages that because they want to keep track of all the foreigners in the country, still, if you're a monk, you've got sort of special privileges because it's a Buddhist country and people respect monks and they don't want to hassle you too much. So yeah, you might have to sign like on your visa application a statement that you will stay in one place. You'll just stay at the meditation center or whatever, but generally you can get around that kind of a thing. So other than that, just going to Asia without being a monk yet, yeah, it would be more difficult unless you've got some kind of system set up with like a major international meditation center that has lots of foreigners coming there anyway. But some obscure tradition, you want to get ordained in some obscure like alchemist tradition or something, then you may have difficulties. You may have to somehow get to the country and settle down somehow, and then start looking around from there. But that would be more difficult. So next question from Zach. Greetings, Bande. Have you read much on the ancient Greek philosophical school of Pyrrhonistic Skepticism? When I first read on the subject, I noticed that there seemed to be many similarities with early Buddhist concepts of no-self, cosmological emptiness, and not becoming attached to philosophical dogmas like Platonism or Abhidhamma. Turns out I'm far from the first who noticed this, and books have been written about cross-cultural influence, though I have To admit I find the argument weak and unnecessary. A man with strong contemplative capability could come upon these insights on his own. So I'm just curious if you have come across Pyrrhonism and what you think on the topic. I'm attaching a like on the connections between Pyrrhonism and Buddhism. I think I should have made it clear that Pyrrhonism, like Buddhism, isn't just skepticism for the sake of skepticism. There is a goal, and that's an ultimate calmness and unruffled nature. I can't remember what it's called though. There's ataraxia, something like that. There also seems to be recognition of an ultimate truth, but also a recognition that none of the dogmas men make up are that. Yeah, I don't think that what the Buddha was teaching was essentially skepticism. There was a teacher that was a contemporary of the Buddha named Sanjaya, and the Buddha's two chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana, were originally disciples of Sanjaya. And Sanjaya was like a Pyrrhonistic skeptic. And I do know something about Pyrrhonistic skepticism. For example, I've read Sextus Empiricus, his outlines of Pyrrhonism. So I have that in my bookcase. Yeah, I think there is a fundamental difference between skepticism, like Pyrrhonistic skepticism on the one hand, and like what the Buddha was teaching on the other. Like a skeptic says you cannot know the truth, which in itself is not skeptical, because that is an assertion right there. And for example, there's the Dighanaka Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha apparently meets with a real skeptic who says, nothing is acceptable to me, which means, no belief is acceptable to him. And then the Buddha points out, well, I mean, you believe that, don't you? You believe that no belief is acceptable to you, so you've already kind of missed the boat. But like you say, it's like the purpose of skepticism is just this peace of mind from not having any passionate or beliefs or any kind of attachment to any kind of belief. And it causes a sort of peace because you're not, you're not fanatically believing anything. But with Buddhism, I don't think that he really had the idea that you can't know reality. His idea, or what he was trying to get across, was that you can know reality, but you're not going to know reality through beliefs. So there is a reality there, and it's not just that you don't believe anything. That's not the whole purpose, but there's like a deeper purpose to that, which is essentially mysticism. So from what I've read about Pyrrhonistic skepticism, they don't seem to be particularly mystical, whereas I think early Buddhism was about as purified of a mysticism as I've ever come across. So it may seem the same at the surface or kind of at the beginning, but the skeptics, as far as I can tell, were saying, you just can't know the truth, whereas the Buddha was saying you can know the truth, but you can't know it through thinking, and so you have to move beyond the thinking in order to know the truth, not just so you get peace of mind through not believing anything, but you can penetrate to the Kantian thing in itself once you've detached yourself from the thing as it seems. So yeah, I would say that there is a difference, and skepticism would come closer to what Sanjaya was teaching. But I could be wrong. I don't know. Next question. Also, this is a good one. Also, if you had to choose between a Seventh-day Adventist, a Hare Krishna, or a devout esoteric Hitlerist as your next religion, which would you choose? It's like a trick question, because I really couldn't devoutly, sincerely believe any of those. So, I mean, I'd have to be insincere with regard to any of them. A Seventh-day Adventist, nah, it's not really my style. I just can't believe that like a Hebrew carpenter created the universe and died for my sins and was the only begotten Son of God and all that. The Hare Krishna, I mean, just the whole, meditation isn't going to get you anywhere, and you just chant the names of God umpteen times, thousands of times a day. Yeah, not so much. And the devout esoteric Hitlerist, with all due respects to Herr Rue, my good friend, yeah, I don't think that. For all I know, maybe Hitler is in some sort of Deva realm right now, but I don't know how anybody would really be able to know that. And personally, I just do not think he was a saintly man. I don't. I think he. I mean, I think Stalin was at least as bad as him. I mean, there were. He wasn't really as bad as he has been demonized to be by mainstream narrative culture, propaganda, history, quote unquote. But yeah, I couldn't. So really, I couldn't be any of those sincerely. So if I just had to just go through the motions and pretend to be one, I guess I'd just have to go with the Hare Krishna. Although I wouldn't want to have the top knot and hang out in airports or whatever it is that they do. They have probably the best food. Hare Krishnas have good vegetarian Indian food. So yeah, I could be like an unorthodox outlier to the Hare Krishnas maybe. I don't know. It comes closest to Buddhism too, as far as I can tell. So next question is from Chaplin. You've mentioned that your father always believed that you are a reincarnation of your paternal grandfather. Can you tell us more about your grandfather as a man and about his life and common threads that you two have in life? That's a good question, although I never met my grandfather unless I was him, in which case I suppose I met myself. But yeah, my father did believe that I'm a reincarnation of his own father. And his father died maybe 20 years before I was born, so there may have been some intermediate state. And I don't recall ever being my own grandfather. So it's just kind of a hypothesis or a theory for me. But, and also, I mean, we are similar in certain ways, although that could just be genetic. But apparently I inherited my intelligence from him. And he was, my grandfather was a scholar. You know, he's working on his 4th doctorate when he died. He had a PhD or a doctorates in philosophy, divinity, and agriculture, and was working on a doctorate in law when he died. And he was gentle, probably more gentle than me. I picked up some of the non-gentleness from my macho dad. And one similarity we had was that he was a Baptist minister, an ordained Baptist minister, and he got ostracized from the clergy for holding unorthodox views. So he was sort of an unorthodox religious person, kind of the way I am. So there is that similarity. And I think possibly the strongest similarity is just like the strong karmic connection with my father. But it's hard to say. I mean, another thing about my grandfather, even though he was a mild-mannered guy, he definitely had like this strong need for a woman in his life. And he was very popular with the ladies because he was very attentive and complimentary and very gentlemanly, that sort of thing. But yeah, I assume just the strongest resemblance with my grandfather, or the strongest resemblances, would just be like general intelligence, maybe a certain amount of weirdness, you know, a certain appreciation for what could be called the paranormal, because my grandfather did have an appreciation for that, even though he started off not really believing it. Even though he's a Baptist minister, my Bible-thumping grandma was really more into the orthodox belief in miracles and that sort of thing than my grandfather was. And just the attachment to my father. So I think those would be the main things, although I'm not fluent in Greek and Latin like he was or anything like that. Although I can kind of hold my own with Pali. Yeah, okay, I guess that's good enough. Next question, also by Chaplin. Would love to hear more about how Buddhism corresponds with the traditional European male mindset or libertarianism and independence in general. Yeah, that's kind of a complicated or nebulous, kind of a tricky one. How Buddhism corresponds with the traditional European male mindset. Well, first of all, there'd be like self-sufficiency. because Buddhism emphasizes that your own successes and failures are your own responsibility. Your own suffering is your own doing ultimately. And it does emphasize, self-sufficiency and fearlessness and, accepting responsibility, and also austerity, like a disdain for luxury and discomfort. So, yeah, there is that. Let's see. Libertarianism. Yeah, I've never really considered how Buddhism would relate to libertarianism or like classical liberalism, other than, we really do have the authority to choose for ourselves what we ought to do. Although, from the Buddhist point of view, there are like universal ethical laws, or at least universal human ethical laws, where, if you cultivate certain mental states, it's going to result in more suffering. If you cultivate other mental states, it'll result in less suffering, more happiness for everybody. So, but it is our own choice and our own doing. It's like, if we go to heaven, we send ourselves to heaven. If we go to hell, we send ourselves to hell. There's no God who's doing that. And so we are on our own, essentially. And so that would be independence in general, I think. So, yeah, that's kind of a difficult question to answer. I hope I got somewhere with it. But yeah, like the Buddha himself was probably Indo-European, and like ancient Indian culture, like Vedic Brahmanism, came much closer to ancient Greece and Rome in its religion than to modern Hinduism. There are the fire sacrifices to the gods for worldly goods, and maybe a little mysticism around the edges, but it was, it was like kind of like early Western paganism. So there's that similarity also, if you want to emphasize that. And yeah, it's probably better to emphasize that just to go along with the leftist feminist version of Buddhism, which is taking over in the West and thereby vitiating Buddhism and turning it into something that it was never intended to be. Okay, next question. From follower number 12C67E7. Wow, I think I already did one by him or her. Okay, anyway. Just read your latest blog post and was wondering if you have any thoughts on Taoism, especially the concept of emptiness or the void, which was a central theme of Taoism. I read the Tathagata, and for some reason it struck me as having some similarities with the Tao Te Ching. Yeah, there are a lot of similarities between Buddhism and Taoism, which is why Zen is essentially a combination of the two. There's one aspect of Taoism that really is not emphasized much in Buddhism, and which I like, and that's the balance of yin and yang. The balance of positive and negative, or light and darkness, how there always has to be a balance. You can't have more of one opposite than another, because they have to maintain some kind of cosmic balance in the long run. And I've believed that since I was a teenager, really. Like, happiness and unhappiness have to balance out. You're not going to have more happiness than unhappiness overall, or vice versa. Although there's the quality of the happiness and the quality of the unhappiness that are also factors. With regard to Taoism and its concept of emptiness or the void, yeah, I really like the Taoist concept of Tao as like the nameless uncarved block, which is what it's called in the Tao Te Ching, where it's not total emptiness. It's not like zero. It's the void or emptiness in Buddhism and in Taoism. It's not just blank zero. It's more like the empty set in set theory, where it's just completely off the scale. You can't really say anything about it without just taking a wrong step. So yeah, I think they are relatively similar, and it's due largely just to the fact that ultimate reality is everywhere, and so you're going to have spiritual geniuses who can get some glimmer, at least, of the Kantian thing in itself, of reality, or God, or the Tao, or the Dharmakaya, or Nibbana Dhatu, or whatever you want to call it, Brahman. And yeah, then they'll try to explain it in accordance with their own language and their own cultural concepts. And so you'll have differences even among the enlightened beings from different cultures, but there are also a lot of similarities. So yeah, I do like Taoism, and I like the Tao Te Ching. I have a few copies of it, a few different translations of it. Next question is from Potila. What text, website, guide, or document could you recommend for Western laity to read to become better informed with how to interact and care for monks? I've often found Asian monks are very deferential when trying to figure out how to assist them. They won't or can't state their needs directly, but Western people don't know the code they are using, and we tend to simply not get the hint. This brings us to an impasse. We don't learn how to fulfill our role as lay people, and the monastic sangha doesn't grow. Our culture thinks an indirect approach is not practical, yet it appears that this is appropriate at times according to the Vinaya. So how do we overcome this as Westerners to help the monastic sangha to grow? We need to be better educated on Buddhist culture outside of the more esoteric meditation philosophy texts. I've not had much experience interacting with many Theravada monks for two reasons. One, language barrier. Two, temple ladies typically are older Asian women who are usually serving monks and have a system in place making it hard to learn the rules and guidelines. Any suggestions on how to address this? I do recall that the Buddhist Publication Society had one of their publications just being pointers for lay people on what lay people should know about monks' rules of monastic discipline. So there is that. I gave a talk on this once. Maybe it was recorded. I can try to look through my files to see maybe I've got like a recording of this talk I gave on just basic pointers for lay people to be aware of, how to interact with monks more properly. If not, maybe I could do a Brian Roux show or something on the subject, or maybe one with somebody else that would be politically correct enough that I could post it on Subscribestar. But other than that, Buddhist Publication Society, on the internet, I assume you can find pointers for monastic discipline for lay people who interact with monks. Or you could, if you've got the time and the interest, you could just go to the Vinaya texts and read those. Although most Asian monks don't even really follow Vinaya very strictly. If you interact with Western monks, they will happily explain things to you. Although just here on this Q&A video, I could just say there are just a few basic points, like money, food, and women are like the three main things that lay people, especially lay women, should be aware of when interacting with monks. Like monks technically aren't allowed to handle money, but of course most Asian ones do, and maybe half of Western ones do. So that may or may not be an issue. With regard to food, a monk is not allowed to eat food that hasn't been offered to him by someone who isn't a monk that same morning. He's only allowed to eat between dawn and noon, and he's not even supposed to ask for food. So offering food is one of the best ways to support a monk. It's one of the few things that a monk really needs. So when you offer with both hands to show respect. You're offering it wholeheartedly. So when you offer anything to a monk, it's good to offer it with both hands. And sometimes if it's something small and it's easily handled with one hand, what the Burmese do is they'll just touch their arm with the other arm, the other hand that they're offering something with, just so that they're still using both arms to offer it. And with regard to women, of course, women aren't supposed to touch monks. Monks aren't supposed to touch women. They shouldn't be alone together. A lot of times if a woman comes to talk with a monk, he'll just leave his door open, which is still pretty much against the rules of nobody can see them. But, just kind of be careful about that. Dress modestly, of course, And another thing is, like a strict conscientious monk won't ask for anything unless you give him permission to ask. So if you are willing to offer something to a monk, let him know that, it's like Venerable Sir Bhante, if you need anything, feel free to consider me, a donor of requisites or something like that. And then they can, if they need something from you, they can ask. But if you don't give them permission to ask first, they can only ask if it's something like if they're really sick and need medicine or something, then it's okay. Or there's another example, like if their robes get lost or stolen or destroyed, they can ask for a cloth to cover themselves with. But it is relatively strict about that. But like I say, most monks aren't particularly strict anyway. And so, each monastery or temple will probably have its own its own sort of rules or lack of same. But you might want to try the Buddhist Publication Society. It's one of the Bodhi leaves. It's old. It's very old. So I don't know if you'll be able to find it, but I'm sure on the internet you could find some guidelines also. Okay, next question, which Potila says is the last question, but there's one more question from somebody else after this. Have you considered finding a way for your followers or students to connect and communicate directly with each other in real time? Frank posed a few good points on a post recently. It would be good to move building some structures, connections at this point. Perhaps hosting a study or discussion session via Telegram or some other voice text chat platform. Actually, I was looking into this earlier, like the Subscribestar channel allows for hooking up a Discord server, like a link to a Discord server on Subscribestar. And the problem with that is I'm a tech retard. I hope I didn't just insult somebody with a mentally disabled loved one, but I really am. And I was stymied almost right off the bat because you had to have like a verified account, and then you had to have, this and that I didn't have. But if there are anybody out there who know how to set up a Discord server and maybe even have it connected with the Subscribestar page, my Subscribestar page, then we could set that up, and that does seem like a good idea. I'm completely unaware of how Telegram works, so that might be a possibility also. But Subscribestar does have an option where you can have a direct link to a Discord server. So if anyone knows how to set up a Discord server and hook it up somehow, you could do it yourself. Maybe if you're so inclined, or maybe even just give me advice on how to do it. But yeah, I am willing, and that is a good suggestion. So last question is from Dog Breath, who I thought was on sabbatical, but he pulled through with a question. He says, "Last night I dreamt I was dying. The thought of dying doesn't bother me during my waking state. However, along with this dream arose a ton of energy from deep within my chest area. Let's call it fear. It woke me up. I have done death meditations in the past and thought I was okay with death, but the energy I experienced last night was forceful and unexpected. Why did my death meditation not prepare me for this more real experience? Are they lacking, or could I have missed something? How can a Western person best approach death so that it is not merely shallow thought based? What is the Theravada or your own perspective on death? What practices does it suggest? My previous practice was Hindu tantric in origin. How can one approach the unexpected?" Well, for starters, I would say that the way we behave in dreams is often very different from the way we would behave in real life. So you can't really judge how you would behave in real life by the way you behaved in a dream. I did have a dream where I was dying just not long ago, maybe a couple months ago. I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I was in my dream, I was walking along, and like a giant hand just scooped me up. You know, some giant hand from the sky just scooped me up and flung me into outer space along with a bunch of other beings. And I don't remember what the other beings were. They could have been humans or they could have been all animals, but I do remember there was one penguin. And we were all out in outer space, and they're all like struggling, floundering in the vacuum. It's sort of like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where Hal cuts off the lifeline of the astronaut, and he's like struggling and floundering in space until he goes still. And that was happening to all the beings around me. But for some reason, I wasn't dying yet. But you know, I had zero air, and I was holding my breath, and I was kind of wondering why I wasn't dying earlier, or dying faster like everybody else was, and just freezing solid. But yeah, in my dream, I wasn't really afraid, but it was obviously a very, very serious, very solemn experience. And finally, I realized that trying to hold my breath as long as I could was just pointless. I might as well just get it over with. And so I breathed out almost all of my air. And then right when I was just fading out into death, I woke up. And maybe that's just the way it is with dreams of dying. I think every dream that I've ever had where I was dying, I always woke up at the moment of death, which maybe is a good sign. I mean, when you wake up at the moment of death, I mean, that's not bad. I mean, how would the dream continue if you're dead, unless you're going towards the bright light and that sort of thing. I think the main practice, I mean, first of all, in Buddhism, there's marananusati, which is, recollection of death. You just remind yourself, that you're going to die someday. Like, I've got a human skull sitting on a table next to my bed, but a memento mori, like in the Middle Ages, that was a big deal. Like if people had a feast, they'd have like the skull on the table just to remind everybody. But it's like a picture on the wall. After you've seen it 1,000 times, it doesn't have much of an effect anymore. But aside from just reminding yourself that you're going to die and just trying to prepare for that, it's like, it's a common saying that life is just a lifelong preparation for death. And in Buddhism, it's like your final moments, your last conscious moment is the most important one, because that determines where you're going to be going, and or it determines your trajectory, going on to the next stage or whatever. So yeah, I mean, if you really are dying, then hopefully inner wisdom is going to kick in, and it won't be like the dream. But aside from that, the best thing to do is just not identify with your mental states and so forth, not identify with your body. Just realize that your body and your mind really aren't you. And like Eckhart Tolle says, nothing that is real dies. It's like whatever dies or comes to an end isn't you anyway. It's just like a certain illusion is dying. And so ultimately, there's really nothing to be afraid of. Maybe if you've lived an evil life, you might have some cause for apprehension when dying. But or if you have like children who are dependent on you, maybe that could be a cause for concern. But yeah, ultimately, nothing that is real dies. It's like whatever, if it dies, it really isn't you anyway. So taking that to heart, not identifying with your body or your mental states, and just reminding yourself that, it's all impermanent anyway. Everything is anicca. At least everything phenomenal is anicca. Everything that has a beginning has an end, So just reminding yourself of that on a regular basis, and just trying to cultivate wisdom, just trying to cultivate your awareness as well as you can, so that you will die as awarely as possible. And I hope that at least knocked a dent into that question. And that was the last question. So I think we're done for this one. And I hope the wind and everything didn't completely mess up the sound quality. And I will continue with more of these if people have more questions. So feel free to leave your questions below in the comments or wait until I put up the announcement for the next one on Subscribestar, and you're all welcome to subscribe to Subscribestar. And there's even a free bracket if you can't afford to donate anything. And be happy. And it bugs me when people are saying, well, I'll see you next time, because actually I won't see you at all, and neither will they. So it's just silly. So I'll just say goodbye and be happy if that is appropriate.